Presenter today is Andrew Kinghorn, better known as Rocky. He's a mining engineer, but we still allow him to speak on the geology platform. Rocky has extensive operating experience from underground and open cast mines and also has contract mining experience. He is qualified as a competent valuator, a competent person, and signs off on reviews, feasibility, pre-feasibility, and scoping studies in the following commodities: cement, coal, gold, platinum, potash, tantalum, iron ore, total rare earth oxides, silver, nickel, niobium, and tin. Andrew is a principal consultant and MD at Shava Mining Enterprises. He's also a non-exec of the Fossil Fuel Foundation and a director of the Southern African Institute of Mining and Metallurgy. He serves on the Johannesburg branch of the SAIMM and is also on the SAMVEL committee. So, Rocky, we look forward to what should be an extremely interesting presentation. Thank you.
Well, first and foremost, Tanya, a big thank you to you for inviting me to talk on the GSSA platform. The talk topic today is what are the accuracy requirements for a feasibility study based on a measured resource that has a 80% confidence level. Guys, feel free to chip in, to break in and chat as we go through. This is an informal presentation. Okay, we're going to kick off by looking at the types of study, the accuracy, and for today's talk, we're going to be looking at the feasibility side. So we're going to need to have some sort of financial analysis. We're going to need an accuracy range for costs, plus minus 10% to 15%. Contingency considerations of about 15% less than. And the key risks are which are poorly defined. For example, geotech, resource, recovery, throughput, revenue, and assumptions. And then I'll just have another slide here just to build a little bit more on. We look at the resource and the reserve and the level of mine design. Okay, now we're going to jump into the most important one, and it's kind of interesting to kick off with a rule of thumb. So I think if we can just work our way through these percentages, because I think this is basically what we're going to be looking at today and discussing. So the rule of thumb confidence intervals for technical studies at an assumed 90% confidence. So once again, looking at the right-hand side for final feasibility, we're looking at plus minus 10 to 15%. Contingency of less than 15%. Proportion of engineering is complete less than 50%. Resource categories are measured and indicated. Reserve categories are proven probable. Mining method is optimized, and the mine design is a detailed mine plan and schedule. And the schedule will need to have monthly, much of the payback period, and with a low level of tolerance. Now, I've also included the sources below. As you can see, they're going back to from 1999 to something a little bit more current. Maybe I can ask, has anyone come across any more up-to-date or more detailed information, or is this kind of still the most useful rule of thumb that's out there?
Rocky, Steve Ruprecht here.
Hi, Steve.
I think my comment would be you'll find slight variations to these numbers, but they're pretty well, the final feasibility is pretty solid, and you'll have slight differences in interpretation of pre-feas and scoping study. But, by and large, they're within that range that one would expect.
Yeah. I think, thank you for that, Steve. I think let's just also look at the issue of, we're assuming 90%, but straight away we then down to 85% in the numbers. So I think I'll be highlighting these discrepancies as we move along. And yeah, let's move through it, and remembering that we're trying to assume for the project that we would like to have a 90% confidence level. Okay, the risk factors for mining projects: human nature, we've got socioeconomic in there; Mother Nature, we've got geographical, biological, which is resource grade, tonnage, mineralogy, mining, and process recoverability. And from a banking perspective, most bankers report that the reserve risk is their major concern. You can do nothing with it if it's not there. Right, jumping to the end of the spectrum, this is the Warren study. It was also done a while ago in 1991. And I think what the main thing that this slide is highlighting is that the grade can be up to a 95% variance. Right, what are the accuracy requirements for a feasibility study based on a measured resource that has an 80% confidence level? The first thing I'd like to discuss, and looking to my resource colleagues, does a measured resource have an 80% confidence level? Does anyone perhaps have an opinion on that? And similarly for indicated, does anyone have an indication of what that level of confidence would be? I think we might come back to this a little bit later then just moving along. When we're looking at the feasibility study, if we start with, let's just say 80% on the resource, and let's just say 80% for mining and 80% for processing, so we're all equal, that means we could potentially drop down to 50%. Now, sometimes we're lucky and we get corrective errors, but other times we're unlucky and we get the compounding errors. What possible solutions do we have for this? In terms of a quantitative risk analysis, we've got deterministic and probabilistic models. And I'm looking specifically now on the resource side. For a deterministic model, we can have a deterministic Kriged resource model with a optimization based on a deterministic model with an optimized production schedule based on one deterministic resource model and two deterministic optimization and a deterministic cash flow to produce a single NPV. Now that's currently the way most of the feasibility studies look and feel. Then if we were to move on a little bit to try and explore the art of the possible, we're going to move on to the probabilistic models. We now look at multiple probabilistic resource models using conditional simulation with optimization based on a deterministic model with a re-optimized production schedule based on a probabilistic let me start again. On one, probabilistic resource models, two, deterministic optimization, and a deterministic cash flow. I've used this as an example of what we could perhaps consider on the resource side. Obviously, we can do something similar on the mining and the processing components. And then in conclusion, the SAMREC code sets out the minimum standards, recommendations and guidelines for reporting of exploration results, mineral resources and ore reserves. We should strive to achieve consistency and best practice in technical reporting within the global exploration mining investment community. So I think, can we go back to my question to my resource colleagues? Are we comfortable that a measured resource will meet the 80% level of confidence?
Hi guys, Kieran here, if you don't mind. I've been in resources now for 10, 12 years or so, and my understanding of measured has usually been in, was it 90% or so, and indicated was in the 80% range, give or take. I've never quite heard of measured being talked about in the 80% confidence interval.
Anja?
Okay, this is Peter Decker. Can you hear me?
The code does not make any contingencies for any percentages. There's no reason to believe that a measured or an indicated or any resource must be any particular percentage. The SAMREC code actually has vastly different requirements.
Thank you for that, Tanya. I think that this is the important issue which I'd like to just to debate and try and get some clarity on.
Okay, this is Peter Decker. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Peter.
Yeah, okay. I come from the oil and gas side, not from the mining side. But in the oil and gas, it's very standard to have P90s, P50s, and P10s. And by definition, the 80% confidence is the whole range between your P90 and your P10, because it's 80% in between there. So you always got the most likely, and that can be either your P50 or whatever. But to give you low case and your high case, within deterministic is then a low and high case, but the probabilistic is your P90 and your P10. So if you do your assessments and if you do your economics and everything, you do it on your P90 and your P10 case of your resources, and then you've got your 80% confidence. The whole issue, however, is that humans cannot think in 80% confidence. If you do all kinds of tests, like give me an 80% confidence the length of the river Nile, you will see that the humans normally give you a 60 to 50% confidence range and not an 80%. That's where a big issue happens in giving you high and low cases. We humans think too narrow instead of what the reality of the uncertainty is.
Thank you, Peter.
If I can make a comment, Aidan Reynolds, there's a couple of things you must consider here. I mean, what do you mean by 80% confidence? Do you mean you're 80% sure of getting the tonnage? Are you 80% sure of getting the grade? Or are you 80% sure of getting the ounces or kilograms of gold at the end of the project? And you've got to differentiate those, because those are all quite important for your cash flow. Also, you know, just talking about percentage confidence, it's a bit like a weather forecast. It tells you you've got 25% chance of rain tomorrow. Well, I believe there's always a 50% chance of rain. It's either going to rain or it's not going to rain. So you've got to be careful about that as well. It's a long debate. Let's carry on.
I think if I can just go back to, let's call it the worst case, where we end up on 50% without bringing any other external factors like financial or environmental into this. So I think what we're looking for, and I think the banks are looking for, is in the order of 85 to 90% in the NPV. The question is, how do we close that gap? Adrian?
The place you must start is your data, is your understanding of the geological model, your understanding of how you've drilled it, whether you've drilled it correctly. And I mean, from my point of view, or my experience, it's the most important thing to understand the geology first, to have drilled it correctly, to have assayed it correctly. And then you can get into the more specific things about whether you're deterministic or probabilistic or what type of kriging you want. But the one thing that's going to make your project fail, and you can do leapfrogging and all this kind of stuff, the thing that's going to make your project fail is if you haven't drilled it properly, you don't understand the ore body, and the model you've put together is nowhere near reality. And you know, I don't want to overemphasize knowing the geological model too much, because you can successfully mine, for instance, the Witwatersrand mines, and still more than 100 years later have an argument about what the model is or what caused the gold. But those to me are the basics. You know, what you're taking, Rocky, is very much 80%, 80%, 80%. So you're taking the worst case of all three things and making them additive. I guess there are projects like that. Luckily, I've never been involved in one of them.
Hopefully none of us will be in that predicament.
Mind you, I was involved in Barbrook in the very old days, and that was pretty close to one of those kind of situations.
So I think just going back to the question then, is the rule of thumb for the whole technical study, which is embracing all the elements, it should be up there at 90%. But can we get there?
Rocky, Steve Ruprecht again. I think, you know, there's been a few papers, McCarthy in the past, and, you know, and the Canadians had a paper, you know, how well have we done? And, you know, the number out there is around, you know, 70. I have a, you know, if I do a due diligence, I have a 70% chance of being correct when I say you will not achieve your stated grade. You will be overspent on capital. You will have, you know, underestimated the cost, and historically, you know, that's the kind of numbers we've seen, and there's been a number of studies from the 1960s onwards and the 80s, and like I say, we easily can say I have a 60-70% chance when I say you're not going to get the grade that you put down on that piece of paper without even opening a book. The odds are in my favor, and that's what the papers have indicated in the past. So, you know, I think when people talk about 90% confidence, it's something to strive for. And I think, you know, not to be too long, the key there is, you know, there are, you know, I think the United States was proposing but didn't put it in the final rules, but there's always this push out there for, especially in the resource side, to put a confidence level out there. Up until now, it hasn't come, but, you know, we could see maybe in 10 years' time this demand that we all put a confidence level to it. But in reality, 90% looks nice on paper, but for those of us that have done a lot of studies and a lot of experience, it's kind of, you'll be very fortunate to get that. That's my comment.
Steve, I'm in full agreement with you. So the question is, how would we go about sensitizing the banks understanding that?
Rocky, this is Peter Decker again.
Hi, Peter.
Yeah, Rocky, I think there's a little bit of misunderstanding, at least from my side, coming from another industry, but same like resources. What do you mean with confidence? Confidence is not one number. Confidence means I'm 90% confident it's bigger than, or I'm 90% confident it's smaller than, or I'm 90% confidence it's between these two numbers. So when you talk about a 90 or an 80% confidence, what do you mean with that? You cannot say I'm 80% confident it is 20, because we can never be 80% confident that it is 20. Because that one number is meaningless. I'm 100% sure you will never find 20. It will be 20 point something or 19 point something. So what do you mean with confidence?
I think that's the right question. And if one were to put a banker's cap on, I think how would we answer that in language that the banker could understand?
Now, for me, that is very simple in the oil industry. What bankers and other investors look at is they want to be 90% confident or 80% confident that it will give you more than a certain number. They don't give a damn how much more, as long as they know there's only a 10% or 20% chance it's going to be lower than that number. If it's more than that number, it's fine. So the confidence in the oil and gas industry is really, we give you the P90. That means we're 90% sure that the amount of hydrocarbons you're going to find is going to be bigger than this amount.
I hear you. It would be interesting to do the reverse analysis to check and see how those numbers have actually G'd out. Because I think from on the other commodities, it's generally been lower than that.
Okay, now I know from the oil and gas that whenever we do, we try to get, for example, in oil and gas, you talk about proven, possible, and probable reserves. The proven reserves are the P90. So if you're 90% sure, you're going to find more than your proven reserves. You're for 50% sure, you're going to find more than your probable reserves. And you're for 10% sure, you're going to find more than your possible reserves. That's how we work. And bankers will never give you lending for anything like possible or probable. They will only give you money for proven reserves. So they always take the risk of 10% chance it's smaller, 90% chance it's bigger.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think if we go back to the slide on grade, because I think this is where the challenge comes in. The grade has been 94% overstated, which in terms of a project is a bit of a problem. How would we manage it from that perspective?
Yeah, I think that is really where you come to your estimates and where you have to do your checks. What we always do is we go back to the history and see what we've done, whether our estimates were right, whether they were within this 80% confidence boundary. So whether they were, whenever we give estimates, and in oil and gas you talk about porosity, saturation, net to growth ratios, and they always have to be within your P10, P90 ratio. And then we go back to the previous estimates we made to see whether we were there. And if we were not there, we had to we change our way of estimating to make sure we're there. If I see this of you 95% overestimated, that means that you haven't done your history check going back, and you haven't adapted the way you looked at estimating the things. So you haven't really learned how to estimate the uncertainty in your grades.
I think you're spot on there. And that's unfortunately what happened in these 35 examples of Australian gold.
If I can just add to that. Carry on.
No, I was just going to say, Rocky, I agree with what Peter's saying, and it's not what, in my opinion, it's not the way we work on our resources or our reserves, but I think there's definitely food for thought in it. The only thing we try to do is we run our sensitivities, but yeah, and it's a history of the companies and things like that. We have more faith perhaps in the majors or the seniors, and the juniors it's more of a risk because of the nature of the beast. But I do like the comment, and maybe that's why some areas are pushing more towards this probability in our resources, and we haven't done it yet, to try to tie it down a little bit better and to do a little bit more back analysis. That's my comment from my side.
Steve, sure.
Okay, Adrian here again. There's just a couple of other things to consider. It'd be interesting to know those 35 gold mines where they're overestimated, how much of them actually didn't make money? Because one of the reasons the grades generally tend to be lower when you stop mining is that the mining people sometimes mine in the wrong place, or they discover hanging wall bands, or they push mining to catch up, and therefore they bring in extra dilution. There's very little in a deposit that makes it a certain grade. It's a certain grade if it's mined in a certain way. So there's also that to consider. I mean, I've been involved in quite a few mines where we've quite happily mined it way below the reserve grade, because that was calculated a year ago, and suddenly the gold price has bumped and you just push anything through you can get. So it's not as simple as just saying, well, we got the grade wrong by 94%, therefore the geologists have done a very bad job. If the geologists have done a good job, but nevertheless along the line, they've found some other bands that are in the hanging wall or whatever, then they take that out as well. And so it's not as simple as just, right, we got it wrong. Sometimes you get it wrong for reasons. The difficulty comes is when a mine pushes the tons because they feel they've got to fill the mill, and not only do they drop the grade, but they drop the kilograms. That happened to Harmony about 20, 30 years ago when they wanted to do 1 million tons a month, and they ended up with less kilograms and less grade and much less profit. But that's another long story.
Well, thanks for that, Adrian. I think, Tanya, on your side, the question then is are we comfortable with the way the codes are currently written, or would we or could we perhaps consider some changes here? Or not necessarily in the changes, but maybe in the way we do our reports be better than, well, provide more information that's actually asked for in the code. Oops.
I am always in favor of providing more information, but I'm not the person you want to have commenting on whether we should have confidence limits or not.
I just find it difficult to determine what a confidence limit means. And without knowing that, it's a problem. I mean, when we've financed mining projects and we've got the banks involved, what they tend to do is say, okay, what's the payback period? Well, it's 2 years. How confident are you in those 2 years? So they push you to do grade control drilling before you even start, so that you might even have a 10 by 10 meter grid, because they know then that at the end of that time, you're probably going to have got it right, almost 100% right. They've been paid back, and then they can walk away and they don't actually care that much.
Yeah.
Yep. Nice to have projects where the payback's only 2 years. But they do exist, especially in gold.
Look, I also think one of the problems, is we're always, talking about the competent person and, how well they do. But, I think somewhere along the line, investors also have to have an idea and an understanding of this is a mining project and it's not opening up a pick and pay. And then comes a comment, there's supposed to be the relation of high risk, high reward, but that doesn't always work out. But I think sometimes we've got to, maybe spend time trying to educate those that are reading these NI 43 101s or competent persons report, because we assume they understand what we've written, but in reality, they truly haven't at times, But that said, we've got to make sure our competent person isn't, pulling the wool over people's eyes. It's difficult enough. But, the comment being, the Americans are moving now towards making, well, if you're listed in America, you have to report your resource reserves exclusive now. They've already stated that because they believe the investor is less confusing to the investor. So, there's all these things moving towards trying to help the investor. But I also think they're sometimes their own worst enemy if they don't understand what's going on. And that can be said for our banking colleagues as well. They're more interested in the bottom line financial model and the number and the payback period, but they actually don't often understand, the detail, the devil of the detail. Anyway, that's my comment again.
Thanks, Stephen. I'm in full agreement. It's how you address that risk chapter and what actually appears in that, and how those risks are actually mitigated is what's important.
Yeah, this is Peter again. For me, it's very interesting to hear this from the mining side. I've not been a lot involved in mining, but I think that in oil and gas, we've gone a step further than where you guys are at the moment. And for us, there's a big difference between risk and uncertainty. Risk is really the on-off switch. It happens or it doesn't happen. I heard earlier somebody says the rain is a 50% chance. No, it's not. Yeah, the rain is either it's there or it's not there. But how much it rains, is it 1 millimeter or 20 millimeters? That's your uncertainty. Yeah, and that difference is what we apply a lot to our resources and potential resources in oil and gas. And maybe, Tanya, it's one of those things where we maybe can cross-learn from each other. That I should set up a kind of presentation about risks or the probability of success and the uncertainty for the mining community. Maybe a thing to think about for the future.
No need to think about that, Peter. Please let me know when you'd be available to do the presentation.
Okay, I will check.
It's called proper task persecution.
Greg Smith here. Just a question from me, which is maybe a little bit of a tangent to what the main topic is here and the direction it's been going. But given the current times we live in and the coronavirus effect on the world economy, what's happening to feasibility studies that are ongoing right now or that have just been completed? It seems to me that there's a whole new risk factor, which is going to translate to an uncertainty factor in all of this. And I'd just like to know if people are thinking about this.
The crystal ball. I think it's a question of when is the demand going to pick up to existing conditions?
In my opinion, it's not just demand is going to be a lot more uncertain over the next 2 years for a lot of different industries. And crystal balls are really needed. For example, the airline industry, it's going to change markedly, I'm sure. Are these kinds of questions being asked in feasibility studies going on now?
Yeah, I'd say that they certainly are. I'm involved in 2 projects at the moment, one at feasibility level, the other at a scoping level. One is rare earths and the other is gold. Gold is easy because people are always going to want gold. It's going to come back again. It's going to come even stronger. So that feasibility study is going on as much as we can go on with it at the moment. Things like the environmental impact studies had to slow down. The rare earth project's an interesting one because China up till now has run both the top and the bottom of the rare earth chain. So it's very difficult if your project isn't Chinese to get involved in the rare earth chain. But we're pretty hopeful that the results of all of this will be people saying, we've got to be careful about China. We can't rely on them because they can let one of these things go off at any time. And their supplies are going to cut down. Okay, there's no demand at the moment, but the demand for rare earths is going to come back. So we're, thinking perhaps a little bit further forward. Maybe things are delayed a year or so, but they're going to come back again. The world's been through worse than this before, and it comes back again. It just takes a bit of time. So for projects that are, one of the projects was likely to be delayed in any case. So we're not that unhappy. We've had, let's say, a force slowing down.
Adrian, Steve Ruprecht, could I ask, just out of curiosity, what gold price are you using for your feasibility? Because, obviously right now, for the last year, gold has been higher than, a typical, but, my big $1 million question would be, would I use a higher gold price, or would I move backwards and be more conservative, assuming that, that after all of this, maybe the gold will seek a little bit lower, knowing that gold was higher prior to this virus anyway. But just out of curiosity, is one using a more conservative number, still in the 13s for the gold price, or is one looking a little bit more, bullish on the gold?
Well, yeah, I got a sort of preliminary work from the guys doing the scoping study, which is going to lead to a PEA, and they'd run the resources at 1,400 gold. And I said, well, that's pretty ridiculous because the spot price is 1,600. So I'd be very happy at running the pit at 1,400 and the resources at 1,600. But I certainly wouldn't be doing what I'm sure some people will be doing and starting to run them at 2,000. So, I'd agree with you. It's better to stay a little bit conservative on this. But, having said that, you mustn't get too conservative with it. I hear these companies that run at, 1,200 gold and so on. And I think that's missing opportunities because that's just too low. And I'm pretty sure that have no belief the gold price is going to go to 4,000 or anything like that. Though in South African Rand terms, it's just a little tick off 1 million Rand a kilogram, which is sort of quite awesome. That's probably rambled on a bit, but no, I agree with you. You know, you mustn't get ridiculous, but at 1,600, I don't see it dropping back much from there, unless we have another severe crisis. Because just to digress a bit, the one thing people don't understand is when, if you like, the shit hits the fan, that's not when the gold price goes up, that's when it drops down. Because when people can't get cash for their equity or for their bonds or whatever, they turn to something they can easily get cash for, and that's gold. And we saw that in 2008. When the banks went under, the gold price came down because it's a store of value that you use in dangerous times, in unsafe times. And that's happened again now. It has recovered, and I think it will carry on doing so.
I'm in full agreement with you, both in terms of gold and also bringing silver into that same sort of basket. I think just a word of caution on the rare earths. The rare earths are a little bit british in terms of the marketing. You know, at one stage there were 180 odd rare earth projects in the world, and all of them multi-billion-dollar projects. But then if you go into the marketing dynamics, the global market only needs 3 to 5 rare earth mines to meet the whole market requirement. There are going to be quite a few unhappy people, you know, if there are 180 projects out there.
Yeah, that's certainly true. And, you know, as I say, the Chinese have controlled it up till now. Australia's got a bit going. America's trying again. I think there's a strategic reason to have other rare earth mines going. And I also think projects that have low capital and are simple and are in relatively easily accessible places, they're going to have the advantage. But yeah, you're right. There were too many rare earth companies. It was just one of those things that sends Vancouver and Toronto absolutely crazy. Just like lithium, all of a sudden everybody had a lithium project and a lithium mine, and there's not room for that much lithium. So the better projects will again do better.
Well, thank you for everyone for joining us today. I think, Tanya, we've more or less got to the end.
I'll jump in here. Is there any more discussion or questions?
Hi, it's Taryn Orford here. I just have a question, and it might be a silly one, but is there somewhere where there's actually defined sort of what are the basic requirements for a pre-feas and a feasibility, and what are the generally expected limits on that, more than just a rule of thumb that's written in the code somewhere? Because we are ending up in the circumstances now where we get a feasibility study from somebody and its quality is horrible, but there's nowhere to say the JOR code says we can't use this because it doesn't have this in it. And we are not a bank, so we are looking at it from a slightly different point of view.
Can I ask which country we're talking about?
In South Africa. But the project we're looking at is in Kazakhstan.
And the commodity, gold or copper?
It's gold and copper.
Sure. Rule of thumb guideline. I've had that problem in China, and when we looked at feasibility studies, what we said was, okay, let's look at each one in its own little right, but perhaps downgrade feasibility to a pre-feas, which is acceptable from a banking perspective.
Okay, I think that helps.
Look, Steve Ruprecht again. My comment would be, you know, if you using the guidelines at the back of the SAMRAC code is probably a good starting point, because it does give you. I mean, Rocky uses it, says as a guideline, but it does tell you what people should be doing and certain aspects of it. You know, if you want, maybe through Tanya, you can send me your email address, and I can send you something that's a little bit more formal that you could use.
Taryn?
I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
There is information on the CIM site. They have a document that details a little bit more what is generally put into a pre-feas and feasibility study.
Great, thanks, Tanya.
Other ways to get a competent person to do a comprehensive review and then come up with a recommendation.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what we're trying to do at the moment, but we're just trying to make sure there's something formal and not just our opinion versus their opinion.
That feasibility study, I assume, it hasn't been done to a SAMRAC requirement, or does it indicate that it has been done to a SAMRAC requirement?
No, they haven't written it according to SAMRAC.
Yeah, I think that, Steve, that's where the challenge comes in.
They use the old Russian code for reserves and resources. If so, run. Especially resources. They're not so bad on their, I think they call them P1 or T1 reserves. Those are generally okay, but anything the other side of what used to be the Iron Curtain, you've got to look at twice before you jump in there, or 3 times.
Exactly. Thanks, guys. I appreciate that.
Yeah, that part of the world, they run on a different system for reporting resources and reserves, and most of it's approved by their national governments. So you need to have the capacity to sort of rerun the estimation yourself and get a certain level of comfort for you to be committed or not.
Yeah, I think I agree with that.
Okay, folks, if there are no more questions or comments, I would like to thank Rocky very much for the presentation this afternoon. Once we get a few bugs sorted out, these presentations will be available if the author agrees to it. In the meantime, thank you all very much. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you same time, same place. I think it's on Saturday for Safiso's talk. Craig, if you can end the meeting, that'll be great. Thank you.
Okay, well, thanks everybody for attending, and thanks to our speaker for providing this opportunity for discussion. The GSSA plans to continue this series in one way or another. It's been pretty successful, even with a few technical hiccups here and there, so I apologize if we didn't get everybody in to speak who wanted to speak. But I think we managed it, I hope, okay. And as Tanya says, the presentations will be made available given the author's permissions. We'll probably do it through the website or either a YouTube channel. We're not quite sure how that's going to happen yet, but we'll message everybody in any case. So thanks everybody for attending. I'm going to close the meeting now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Cheers. Bye.
Bye.